Just want to take a few minutes and review with you seniors about the rest of the work in economics. I'm looking forward to finding out how your stock market reports will have finished up, see which one of you has made the most money. It's been a rough time for the stock market, but we are going to finish the project up. I want to remind you that you need to turn in the last 2 weeks, the closings of Friday, May 1st and May 8th. Make sure the graphs are done correctly. A couple of you have tried to put all the graphs on one sheet, and that's not according to instructions. One graph sheet, one graph on each sheet, done large and correctly. In addition to that, to be turned in on the May 15th drop-off, you're going to be doing the whole project graph. Now remember, originally we were going to do the poster along a large poster board, but we're not going to do that, but you're to put the information on a regular graph sheet, just as you've been doing. Now remember, we're looking at all the closes from Friday, February 28th until Friday, May 8th. I think there's about 10 weeks that we will have looked at here. Take the information from your weeks that you've turned in already, place them on one chart, one for each of the companies. In addition to that, I want you to turn in on a sheet of paper, you can staple it to it, the amount that you purchased in money from each stock and the amount that it closed at, and whether or not you have earned or lost. And then on that same sheet of paper, make sure you let me know whether or not you made profit or loss on all 3 stocks together. Now remember, your figures were about approximately $15,000 to begin with. Now we're going to see how you did at the end of the project. Find out which one of you are going to be the future investors of the world. But make sure you complete that project and you will receive a grade for those graphs. And that will include the last final graph of the whole time. Now when it comes to the textbook, there's a lot of material here to cover, and I'm going to alter your responsibilities a little bit. The farther we move through the text, you'll find the less number of terms there are in it. Much of this remaining chapters, we're looking now at chapters 9 through 14, are going to be dealing with the differences, perhaps, I might could use that expression, the differences between the command economies, those that you see in the communist nations of the world. A great deal of information is given about how these countries operate and how the economic systems operate. And of course, it will also compare that with the United States and the type of free market economy that we have. There are, within this time sections of your reading, there will be some summations of the whole materials. And so what I've listed for you to do, your responsibilities, and again, there's a lot of reading to do here, but I want you to read all of chapters 9 through 14. Now I suggest that you don't do this in one setting. I suggest you take time, set aside a time period a day and read a chapter. While you're reading the chapter, you are responsible to do all the terms in the chapters. Okay, and like I said before, there's not as many as you get near the end of the book, but I still want you to make sure you write down the terms by the chapters, just as we have been doing, and make sure you turn those in as well on May 15th. Now you'll notice on the sheet that I gave you that there are a number of essays that you must complete. And these essays will help me understand whether you have spent time reading in the chapters. They also will be graded. Just a couple words about each. If you look in your book on page 196, for example, I think that's the first one that I have for you there. Pages 196 and 197, you can see pretty clearly what the essay is all about. And I just described it this way: discuss the potential dangers of government involvement in the economy. And this is really important to see, because in The problems we're dealing with the coronavirus, you can see that the government has taken some unusual steps. But here the textbook just kind of explains that even though we realize that government has a role in our economy, we do expect the government to protect the consumer and etc., that some of these things really put the government in a position to direct the economy more like a command economy. So what I've asked for with your essay, this is the essay number 1, discuss the potential dangers of government involvement in the economy. What are the potential dangers? How can these things affect the nation's economy? Okay, and then number 2, this is taken from chapter 11. If you'll turn here in your books, page 200, you'll see another interesting thing. Along with this, I also want you, and you will have read this by now, I hope, you look also over to 220. You'll notice there are 2 theories, you might say, of dealing with economics and dealing with how to boost or to increase economic growth. The one we're familiar with a little bit from American history, because we know that President Roosevelt's advisors supported an untried system known as Keynesian or Keynesian theory. Remember, John Maynard Keynes was the fellow that developed this idea, and there was a real push during the New Deal legislation to encourage the involvement. Remember, this was called priming the pump, if you can remember, and you can see that in your reading here. What I want you to do is refresh your memory, read the material here in the text on page 200 in chapter 11 that will describe him. There is also a section in there about this economist as well. Then I want you to look on page 220 in chapter 12, and it mentions another approach to how to stimulate or boost the economy. And this is called supply side economics. And you remember, this was the philosophy of President Reagan. A little different approach to how to deal with a lagging or a highly inflated society, how to improve the economic system in our country. Now, I think that it's important, and I want you to be able to understand the two, discuss these theories. I'm not expecting you to copy it word for word out of the textbook. I want you to show me that you understand it. You can put it into your own language. Okay. Then from chapter 11 as well, on page 218, this chapter deals a great deal with problems in the economy, and one of those problems is inflation. And again, this is so current and so important. We're liable to see inflation in the weeks ahead. And the reason for that is because of the large amounts of money that is being poured into the economy. And whenever you free up the money supply, it really means that money is worth less than it was before. So I want you to make sure that you understand inflation. And so I just said discuss the causes and effects of inflation. What are the things that cause us to see the rising of prices, and therefore the dollar being less valuable? And by effects of it, I'm thinking more in terms of long term, of how it can really affect the nation. And then number 4, discuss 3 of the 5 questions and answers to the doomsday prophets. And in chapters 13 and 14, there's a lot of interesting things as the author of the text describes some of the arguments against free market economies and some of the problems that we face. And this chapter in particular, chapter 13, deals with globalism. And certainly we have seen that emphasis, and perhaps we're beginning to see that maybe some of the ideas of globalism have not been so beneficial as we have seen with the coronavirus. But many of these things are described here in your textbook. And you'll notice that, as I listed there, the doomsday idea that, the world is getting worse and worse, and if man doesn't do something quickly to change these things, we're going to have terrible, terrible times. Now you can see where we're leading to. The idea of globalism, the idea of big government, and the government taking more and more control. So in chapter 14, as you'll notice, it talks about refuting the prophets of doom. What do we mean by prophets of doom? Well, people are going around, this has been going on for years, but we hear all of these things going to take place. You'll notice there's a series of questions and answers. Beginning on page 263, the first question brought up there, will the world of tomorrow be overpopulated? So the question of overpopulation. Over on page 264, the won't be able to feed all the peoples of the world. You know, we cannot keep up with the gross increase in population, and people are going to starve to death. The third question, the world's running out of raw materials. You know, what are we going to do? Again, this is why your textbook or the author of the book calls it Prophets of Doom, because they just paint this picture that the whole world is falling apart. Well, as you can go on through, and there's a few more questions here on the next couple pages, but read through this and think about it. Now, I've asked you to discuss 3 of the 5 questions and answers to the doomsday prophets. And I think it's important that you not only know the question, but you know the answer, and you know it from a conservative perspective of someone who supports the concepts of free market economy. Many of these doomsday type questions have driven the economy farther away from free enterprise and more to command type economies. Now again, just in review, this last segment, the material you're going to be tested on or going to count grades for to come up with your grade will be, first of all, the finishing up of the projects. You're going to receive grades for finishing the stock market project. You're also going to receive grades for the terms that you'll turn in chapters 9 through 14. Make sure you do them legibly, neatly, and in order that I can read them. And then, of course, there will be grades given for your essays. And again, there are 4 essays. I don't think they're necessarily long, but they need to be well written and they need to be your own words. I might remind you that it's real obvious to tell whether or not you have written it, whether you just copied words from someone else or out of the book. So I'll be reading these carefully. And then the last part, I've decided to give you the final exam. Now again, it's kind of interesting, a final exam in which you can find all the answers in your textbook. I do think it's a good review, and that's the reason I decided to give it to you. I thought about making out some questions of my own for it. I thought, what better way to cover the material than the Becker program that would require you to study. I think there's probably 100 questions. Make sure you look up the answers and get them correct. It would be rather foolish not to do your best. And of course, that will be graded as well, and I will expect it to be a near perfect paper. You really no excuses for not doing your very best. Again, I'm sorry that this situation has come about. We're unable to have class, but hopefully your own study of this material will help you to do a good job. Thank you.